Let's do it live. All right. Let's do this. Sorry about that. Had to get all the, various socials to know that, hey, we're live Wednesday morning. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. You can wake up with us each and every weekday morning here for the live show. Join the live chat. And while you're at the internet place of things, be sure to get to thecentersquare.com where you can get the newsletter. All right, today we're going to be focusing on public safety with President Donald Trump continuing to have that discussion during a 3-hour cabinet meeting yesterday. We'll hear some comments from him, but also Governor J.B. Pritzker being asked about the National Guard and also about no cash bail. But we have Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, Stacey Davis Gates from the Chicago Teachers Union, all together during a news conference yesterday about Labor Day activities. But they obviously took the time to criticize Trump, calling him a fascist and a variety of other things. So we'll tackle that coming up. But we've also got to get to a complicated campaign finance issue that the Illinois Senate president faces, connected with Ryan Morrison from the Liberty Justice Center, and we talked about the latest in what's going on with Senate President Harman's campaign finances, and where he's facing like a $10 million fine for violating Illinois campaign finance law. So that's what's coming up today. Just a couple of segments here for you. But again, I want to remind you, we're here each and every weekday morning live, where you can wake up with us, get the headlines in your inbox at thecentersquare.com. Real simple. All you got to do is just head to thecentersquare.com, click on newsletter, and you'll get the latest headlines. And keep in mind, the Center Square is not just Illinois. You can see we've got coverage across the country, including in Washington, D.C. So it's a great outlet for you. And here's the key thing: it's free. We're a free newswire service, but we're also a nonprofit, so you can donate to us to help keep us doing what we're doing here. Greatly appreciate you guys being here each and every weekday morning. It is Illinois in Focus Daily. Coming up, we'll get to the latest back and forth about public safety in the land of Lincoln and in the Windy City. Continues around public safety, and President Donald Trump toying with the idea of sending the National Guard beyond Washington, D.C. into cities like Chicago, as Chicago continues to react. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. You can wake up with us here each and every weekday morning here on YouTube for the Center Square's breakdown of what's going on in Illinois and beyond. Get the headlines at thecentersquare.com. I'm Greg Bishop, editor for Illinois at the Center Square. And greatly appreciate you guys being with us each and every weekday morning. Let's get to it. All right, Trump yesterday holding a marathon cabinet meeting and opening it up, talking about a whole host of issues, and of obviously public safety being one. After a couple of weeks ago, he ordered the National Guard to go to Washington, D.C. to help fight crime. He hinted that he could do this to other cities, and then he also hinted that he would work to end cash bail. Monday this week, you get the announcement that he signed an executive order that is going to withhold funds from states that have no cash bail. So we'll hear what Governor J.B. Pritzker has to say. He said that they haven't talked about a response to that executive order quite yet. So we could actually see that executive order in 30 days. A list of jurisdictions with no cash bail will have to be produced, given to the president, and then the federal agencies are going to go about looking at withholding funds. So you got about less than a month here before that triggers, and we'll see just how that goes and what kind of lawsuits there will be. So, but the president also just talked about public safety, and again, he narrowed his focus on Governor J.B. Pritzker.
And I don't like getting into looks. Looks don't mean anything. And I don't like getting into looks. Looks don't mean anything, right? When you're in politics, looks don't matter. I look at Pam, I would never say she's beautiful because that'd be the end of my political career. Laurie, secretary. But I will tell you, this is the best of all. And they're going to fight me. Like this slob of a governor you have in Illinois. This poor guy got thrown out of his business by his family. Know the family. I was partners with the family. Nice family. I like the family, but he was no good. They threw him out. He's governor of Illinois, and he goes about Trump, we don't need his help. Chicago is the worst. These places are really bad.
So Trump obviously looking at Chicago, while Chicago officials say crime rate's down. They point to the murder rates, going from 900 a year to 600 a year, and a decline over several years of homicides. But when you look at some of the other crimes, vehicle carjackings, it's up. You've got a variety of different classifications of robbery and burglary that are up in Chicago as well over the past 4 years. But we'll hear some of what the Chicago officials have to say about it, but more from President Donald Trump yesterday, talking about how maybe he's just going to have to wait for Pritzker to call him and request some assistance to get public safety under control in Chicago.
And you would think that Illinois would have such a problem with crime, such a bad governor. He should be calling me, and he should be saying, could you send over the troops, please? It's out of control. It's out of control. In New York, it's out of control. Not as bad as Illinois, by the way. Not even close.
And what's going to happen? Will Trump just decide on his own, which he said yesterday that he believes that there is a crisis? And is that something that's going to trigger the president to unilaterally move in the National Guard with some kind of, declaration of, a violent crime emergency or a disaster declaration or something like that? Because posse comitatus is an established principle in United States law that says the federal military cannot be used for domestic law enforcement unless there's something like an insurrection. So that's going to be an interesting legal battle if indeed President Trump moves forward with using the National Guard to address crime. And that's what the president says is his motivation, is to address crime. We'll hear what the Democrats think the president's motivation is, including a congresswoman saying it's all a distraction from the release of the Epstein files. So we'll hear that in a moment. But here's Governor J.B. Pritzker yesterday at the Decatur Farm Progress Show. Unrelated event. He's talking about investments, and you can read about that at thecentersquare.com. But he was asked about, well, what if Trump does indeed put the National Guard on the streets of Chicago? What are you going to do about it?
What are you suggesting? I mean, we follow the law here in Illinois. Let me be clear. And when there is federal law that applies, we follow that. Where there's state law that applies, we follow that. What we are doing in the state right now is making sure that the president and those folks in Washington who are thinking about sending troops on the ground in a major American city is that they understand that no one wants them to come, that crime is down, murders in particular, down 50% in the city of Chicago over the last 4 years, 30-some% over just the last year. So I think the president is still operating on some antiquated idea, and it frankly has had it in for Chicago since way before way before he even got elected in 2016. So we're doing our best to let them know. Also, if they decide to do it, we're going to make sure and go to court about it, because frankly, you're not allowed, according to Posse Comitatus Act, to send armed troops into an American city to fight crime. It's only in the event of an insurrection, and that's not happening.
So the governor saying an insurrection's not on the streets of Chicago. But again, you hear the stories. I mean, 6 people killed over the weekend, dozens shot. There's been several mass shootings, people gathering a party or something, and then maybe it's gang violence. And it's every weekend you hear these horror stories in Chicago. And it's not like it's happening on the banks of of Lake Michigan. This is happening in pockets of the city. And you've got individuals like those with Flip Chicago Red or Chicago Red, and they're talking about the real world impacts on their streets and the violence and the loved ones they've lost. It's something that they can't get back, obviously, and they're demanding that the president do something about it because they're critical of Democrats not doing anything about it and taking what they say is a soft on crime approach. So the governor saying that what they're going to do is just, I guess, go to the courts if Trump does indeed put the military on the streets of Chicago to address crime. Yesterday, Chicago city officials, including Brandon Johnson and other elected officials, held a news conference about Labor Day activities. Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, former state legislator, now representing parts of Chicago in U.S. Congress, she talked about how the idea of the National Guard being in Chicago, or the president hinting at putting the National Guard in Chicago, it's all a distraction, she says.
I know that my colleagues in D.C., the Republicans, hope that we have forgotten about the Epstein files, and we're going to make sure that we don't forget about the Epstein files. We know that threatening to send military, National Guard to the city of Chicago is a distraction, so we don't demand those Epstein files. We will do everything we have to do to make sure that we keep demanding that.
So she goes on to say that the Republicans are also trying to distract from cuts to Medicaid, cuts to SNAP, and cuts to FEMA and things along those lines. But she also used the F word.
Here's what I want to say, because we have a couple more speakers and we're really talking about getting pumped up for a protest and rally we're going to do on Labor Day. I want to say that in the face of authoritarianism and fascism, and let me say authoritarianism wasn't a word I was used to saying, so it took a while to actually know how to pronounce it, because we didn't think we had to talk about or use that word repeatedly in this country up until Donald Trump became president. But let me tell you that in the face of fascism and authoritarianism, it is solidarity, worker solidarity, that is protecting us.
So fascism and authoritarianism is what she says they're trying to push back against. You've got the Chicago Teachers Union president, Stacey Davis Gates, there as well, and she decided to say that this is a white supremacist tactic.
You contextualize the struggle in the context of white supremacy that tells us that you can vote for a man who deliberately targets black-led cities because it doesn't fit his marginal white supremacist definition of competence and leadership.
And back to Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, who is there as well. And he says that the Trump administration and Republicans are more interested in sending tax cuts to billionaires instead of addressing what he calls the root problems of violent crime.
In fact, they would rather send the military into our cities than address poverty. They would rather occupy our city with soldiers than allow themselves to be taxed so that we could fully fund education and provide housing for everyone. They would rather rip health care away from millions of poor people than allow their tax breaks to expire. They would rather send the National Guard to harass homeless people than just build affordable housing. They would rather cut SNAP and food assistance from families struggling to get by than pay a single dollar more in their own taxes.
So Johnson has been talking about the need for, quote, progressive revenue, and he's even saying that he wants to get certain home rule authority to increase taxes on people in Chicago even more. And instead of the issue of getting more law enforcement on the streets, earlier in the day yesterday, Johnson was on MSNBC's Morning Joe, and Joe Scarborough was really trying to get him to address the issue of public safety. And is it a good idea to get some actual police officers on the street? Because one estimate is there's 2,000 police officers short in Chicago. You've got Joe Scarborough saying, hey, why don't you get 5,000 more? If you had that, wouldn't that be better?
I believe the streets of Chicago would be safer if you got all of those other extraordinary programs put back into place, which do have a history of being successful, if that's complemented by having 5,000 more cops on the streets of Chicago.
I don't believe that we should narrow it down to just police officers, Joe, is what I'm saying. That is an antiquated approach. I'm saying we've invested in detectives.
Mr. Mayor, are you hearing what I'm saying? I'm agreeing with you that all of these other social programs are extraordinarily important. I just need a yes or a no.
And he didn't really get a yes or a no response. Johnson again went on and talked about investing in housing when asked about would more police help with public safety. When we talked with Republican State Representative Patrick Sheehan yesterday, he's also a law enforcement officer, and you can watch that segment from yesterday at the Center Square's YouTube channel. But I asked him, as a law enforcement officer, what his thoughts are about the possibility of having the Guard come in to assist with public safety.
Yeah, I'm not really understanding that as a police officer that's been in law enforcement for over 20 years. Any help that we can get to help deter crime is a net positive. This isn't a Republican issue. This isn't a Democrat issue. Public safety is an everybody issue. And I don't understand why. And I'm not going to speak for the Chicago police. They have an absolutely fantastic union. Lodge 7 is great. President John Catanzara and their group have been extremely supportive of me. And I don't know if they actually have a stance on that. I will let them, decide whether the National Guard fits in with whether it's a deterrent. In D.C., it seems to be that they're working in conjunction with their federal partners and the D.C. Police Department. If that works here in Chicago, and that's what the FOP union wants, then I'm all on board for it. But me speaking personally, as a police officer, all the help that you can get to help deter crime and keep our citizens safe, I mean, we'll take every little piece of it.
It's a question that I had for the governor. I just wasn't up in Chicago the other day, but why not just ask for some help? Why not cooperate? Why not say, hey, we could use a couple of thousand more individuals to help keep certain parts of the streets of Chicago safer. Instead, it's turned into a very divisive political issue with terms like fascism and authoritarianism being thrown around. And even the president yesterday joking about how, if it takes a dictator to, solve crime, I guess he's a dictator, but he doesn't want to be. And I think that's also why the president's been hedging, right? He's been saying the past couple of days, well, maybe we just wait for the governor to call to make that happen. But we'll be continuing to watch that. But there's this other thing, as we talked about at the top of the segment, the no cash bail issue. That's real prescient right now, because that could be billions of dollars for the state of Illinois being withheld. And we know the state of Illinois' finances are in a really tough spot. And you can even go back to the conversation we had with Patrick Sheehan, the state representative, and he says, yeah, Illinois is going to be strapped if the loss of federal funds happens here. And Governor J.B. Pritzker, being asked about that yesterday, he says they don't have an official response to the president's executive order to withhold funding from jurisdictions that do no cash bail.
We have not yet discussed a response, and I can say that it's clear that the president really hasn't read any of the background or actually what's happened as a result of the law being put in place. People are showing up for trial at the exact same rate that they were showing up before, which is terrific, exactly what we had hoped. And most importantly, people who've committed violent crimes are being kept in jail more often and for longer than they were when we had cash bail. So I believe that that'll be part of the discussion when the case gets brought, because there'll either be a case or there'll be a conversation with the federal government about it. But they need to understand better why it's working and why punishing states that, well, the only state that has done it makes no sense. And in fact, it's working and should probably happen in other states as well.
So the governor talking about no cash bail and how he says it's working, but we've got others on the other side of the aisle saying it's not, and there are people who are being victimized by their assailants being back out on the streets after they get arrested, waiting for cash bail's Pretrial Fairness Act to get to trial, and it's we'll continue to watch this. It is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, the obligatory request here on YouTube. Greatly appreciate you guys each and every weekday morning. Join us live. Get the podcast where you get podcasts, or just get the headlines at thecentersquare.com. Just a brief moment here. Somebody in the chat yesterday asked if, what's the name of the theme song? They don't have names. They just like dates on them. It's just stuff that either I've made in my home studio here, or stuff that me and my brothers have performed in my brother's basement. And love music, love playing music. So, I mean, you got to get some royalty-free stuff. So that's what we did. Just figured I'd throw that in here in between segments. That's why you guys watch live, is to see some of the off-the-cuff stuff. So enjoy. All right, Illinois campaign finance has a stack of things you got to follow, and if you're going to run for office, you've got to follow campaign finance law in the state of Illinois. But the leading Democrat in the Illinois Senate faces a potential $10 million fine for allegations he violated campaign finance. It is Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Each and every weekday morning, you can wake up with us and join the live chat and sound off there as we at thecentersquare.com bring you some of the latest headlines. And you've got election 2026 right around the corner, right? The primaries March 17th, and then you've got the general election in November. But while we're going into election season, previous elections, people were raising red flags about campaign finance with Senate President Don Harmon. I connected with Ryan Morrison from the Liberty Justice Center yesterday to talk about this case, because the Illinois State Board of Elections hasn't heard the complaint against Senate President Don Harmon on how the allegation is he violated campaign finance, the self-finance rules of campaign finance law in the state of Illinois, and he faces a potential $10 million fine because of those alleged violations. Here is Ryan Morrison from the Liberty Justice Center, just giving a brief overview.
Well, unfortunately for Senator Harmon, he has run headlong into a complicated system of campaign finance law in Illinois. He is looking at about a $10 million fine for accepting contributions over the contribution limit for his campaign, for his reelect.
So getting a little bit more into the weeds here, Ryan says that this comes down to Harmon kind of skirting the self-finance rules that lifted the caps of how much they can then take in. Because unless you self-finance beyond a certain point, you're kept at a certain threshold of individual campaign contributions. But if you self-finance and blast through that cap, and from my understanding, I'm not an attorney, and I have not read all of the election code when it comes to campaign finance, but from my understanding, if you blast that cap, then you can start accepting donations higher than what the cap was. We've seen this happen with, for instance, Governor J.B. Pritzker. Obviously, he's spent like $250 million, if not more, or something wild like that, on his campaign since he started running in 2018 and getting the office in 2019. But some more detail from Ryan about this particular issue and the self-funding conflict that Harmon's accused of doing and facing a $10 million fine over.
But there's a provision up there, me not being that familiar with Illinois' campaign finance law, that allows you to exceed the limits if you do it through self-funding. And that's what he tried to do. He gave himself a large amount of money and that in order to allow him to exceed the limits, but it would also let his competitors do that as well. Unfortunately, that only lasted through the primary election cycle. And it really comes down to the way the election cycles are defined in Illinois. It runs from January 1st through the primary election. And if he won the primary election, it would continue on through the general election. However, this was the primary election in 2024, which he did not participate in because his election is not until 2026. And so it cut off his ability to get excessive campaign contributions, but he kept donating it to himself, not realizing that the law says the primary election, not his primary election. And now he's complaining that, well, that's not the intent of the law. That's not the way the law was meant to be. And he could very well be right about that. However, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And unfortunately for Senator Harmon, he's arrived at that destination with the $10 million fine.
And that's a lot of money. $10 million is, it'll come, out of his campaign funds, but regardless, that's $10 million. It's been reported that Harmon and his team, they say that the board's narrow interpretation, it unfairly hampers his ability to politic, and it ignores what they say was the legislative intent of the campaign finance law. But Ryan Morrison with the Liberty Justice Center, he says when the finality of this happens and the final ruling is made, what's going to happen here ultimately? When are we going to know about this and get some clarity on the law and how it should be implemented and followed?
Well, I don't really know. There wasn't really an announced decision after they met last week. Our client, Mr. Nick Benatti, of course, as you probably know, he is very much a campaign finance watchdog in Illinois. And we're just waiting to see whether or not they're going to allow us to intervene so he can be a party and what the decision of the board is going to be. You see, much like the federal version, there is a bipartisan representation on the board. And they can, in an 8-member committee, a 4-4 tie is very possible. And if there is a tie, then the complaint is dismissed. However, if Mr. Benatti is allowed to be a party, he can appeal that to an Illinois Court of Appeals and then get a ruling from them about whether or not the law applies to Senator Harmon and whether or not he has to pay.
So you're a taxpayer, you're a voter. You obviously, as I can tell from the live chat, a lot of you worried about the cost of living, energy prices in the state of Illinois, gas prices in the state of Illinois, high property taxes in the state of Illinois, these kitchen table issues that you hear about, right? But what about campaign finance law? Do voters care about that? Is this on people's radar? Can they delve deep and sink their teeth into this issue about blasting through campaign finance caps by self-funding and then opening it up? Is this something that voters care about? Ryan, answering that question.
Well, that's interesting. I'm a native Kentuckian, and my great senior Senator Mitch McConnell usually says the electorate cares about campaign finance law about as much as they care about static cling. And I believe they're right. These laws exist to deter quid pro quo corruption or the appearance thereof, but most modern research shows that the public believes the government is corrupt no matter if these laws exist or not. I mean, if we have strict campaign finance laws, the public thinks the government's corrupt. If we don't have strict campaign finance laws, the public thinks the government is corrupt. So I really don't know how much they care about a campaign finance violation or not. I mean, all they're going to hear is Senator Harmon violated the law. And of course, that's not good for any politician to have that accusation made against them. But how much money these people take in, I don't know that the public cares that much. They just want good government and people to fulfill their promises.
Will we get that announcement of whatever the outcome is going to be before another election? And it's a great question. But Ryan says it really just comes down to politicians need to follow the laws that they put in place themselves.
No, other than it just shows that when you create complicated campaign finance laws, either at the federal or here in this case, the state level, you can get yourself into a whole lot of trouble if you don't dot your I's and cross your T's and pay really, really close attention to what the law says. Philosophically and personally,